It was nearly midnight when Maya Williams stepped out of the executive elevator on the top floor of the Glasswell building, the glow of city lights reflecting off every sleek surface. The air was sterile, cooled to perfection, humming quietly with machines that never rested. The office was empty, the kind of empty that buzzed with the ghosts of ambition, quiet, relentless, and a little sad. She walked past the boardroom with its wall of awards, past her own glass office with the blinds half lowered like always, and made her way into the break room where the only light came from a flickering soda machine and the distant moon. She wasn't here to work. Not tonight. She just needed to exist somewhere no one expected anything from her. Somewhere without board votes, investor calls, or the echo of her late husband's absence. Elijah's desk had been cleared a year ago, and yet she still saw the way he used to leave his mug half full, the rim stained with coffee and resolve. She poured herself some tea, jasmine, the kind he used to make her when she was anxious, and sat at the long metal table that never felt inviting. That's when she heard it. A soft thud. Not alarming. Familiar in a strange way, like the building clearing its throat. She followed the sound down the hall past the IT department and toward the storage hallway where only maintenance staff ever wandered. He was there, crouched near an air vent, tightening something with a worn wrench and humming so quietly she almost missed it. He wore a navy jumpsuit, a patch reading D. Carter stitched on the chest. He didn't look up right away, just kept working, patient and exact, like the machine would speak if he listened hard enough. Then he turned his head, met her gaze with eyes that didn't flicker, and said, "Didn't expect anyone this late." His voice was smooth but tired, the kind of tired that came from carrying something you couldn't set down. "Neither did I," she replied, and for a beat, neither of them moved. Then he nodded once, returned to the bolt, and said, "Ventilation's been off by 2 degrees. You'd be surprised how fast discomfort builds when no one's paying attention." She stayed, not to watch him, but because leaving suddenly felt like surrendering to the same rhythm that had kept her empty for years. "I'm Maya," she said eventually. "I know," he replied without arrogance. "I clean your floor." She blinked, unsure whether to laugh or apologize, so she said, "Then I guess I owe you more than a thank you." He shrugged, not dismissively, just truthfully. "You owe me nothing. Most people never see me. You do. That's enough." She didn't know how to answer that. So she nodded, and for the first time in weeks she felt like she wasn't performing. She left him with a quiet, "Good night, Mr. Carter," to which he replied, "Call me Dante." After that night, it became a rhythm. She'd stay late, sometimes with files she didn't need to review, sometimes with nothing but silence. He would appear, fixing lights or running diagnostics, never intrusive, always present. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. He told her about the piano he used to play at church, about his mother who cleaned houses so he could go to school, about the way Boston winters felt less cruel when you carried warmth in your hands. She told him about Elijah, about how he died suddenly, a heart attack during a dinner party, how the paramedics spilled wine on the carpet and she never replaced it. She spoke about the weight of leadership, how success made her more visible but less human, how sometimes she wished she could walk barefoot in the city without anyone recognizing her. Dante listened, always with the same steady presence. Not pity, not judgment, just attention. Then came the photo. Grainy, obviously taken through the break room window late one night. Maya leaning against the table, laughing softly. Dante beside her, smiling without reserve. It wasn't scandalous, it wasn't even intimate, but it was enough. The image circulated quietly, first in Slack messages, then in an anonymous memo sent to HR. The subject line read, "Conduct and Optics." They called her in. The room was beige and too bright. Two HR reps sat with folded hands and careful tones. "This is not disciplinary," one said, "but it is concerning." She asked what exactly they were concerned about. They mentioned image. They mentioned boundaries. They never mentioned race, but it hung in the room like humidity. "Are you suggesting I can't speak to the janitorial staff after hours?" she asked. "We're just suggesting caution," they said. "You understand." Later that night, she found Dante in the hallway near the freight elevator. She told him everything, every word of the meeting, every insinuation. He didn't flinch, just leaned against the wall and asked, "What are you going to do?" She looked at him, eyes blazing, not with anger, but clarity. "I'm going to stop pretending that what we're doing is anything but right." He tilted his head. "Even if it costs you?" She nodded. "Especially then." They met less often after that, not because they wanted to, but because they had to. Still, he started leaving her things again. A quote written on a napkin. A bag of warm pastries from a shop she mentioned once in passing. A folded piece of paper with a sketch of hands holding roots. She responded in kind. A book of poetry. A rare jazz record. A piano key wrapped in ribbon. They never labeled what they were doing. They didn't need to. It was real, and that made it dangerous. One evening, she found a manila envelope on her desk. No return address. Inside was a printed photo, the same grainy image of her and Dante, but this time, a red X was drawn across Dante's face. No words, just that. She stared at it for a long time before shredding it and flushing the pieces. The next night, she went to find him. He was in the break room, wiping down the counter. When she walked in, he saw something in her eyes that made him stop. She reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "No uniforms," she said. "No business cards. Just two people in a room." He smiled, the kind that cracked something open. "Then let's start right here." As they stood there, hands linked under flickering fluorescent light, something shifted. Not in the world outside the world would continue its whispering, its judgment, its sterile meetings and unsigned letters, but within them. A line had been crossed, not a scandal, a threshold. And on the other side was something neither of them had expected, but both of them needed. Not romance, not yet. Something older, recognition, refuge. But they both knew the world wasn't done with them, not by a long shot. The wind that morning carried the smell of something old being made new. It wasn't yet dawn when Maya unlocked the heavy padlock to the studio space she and Dante had found in a forgotten corner of Roxbury. The building had once been a bike repair shop, long abandoned, its bricks chipped and its roof sagging like it had given up listening. But to Maya, it was potential. She had found the listing by accident, buried under tax lien properties while researching real estate abuses in the neighborhood. Something about it had called to her. Maybe it was the way the sunlight filtered through the dust when they first opened the door. Maybe it was how Dante ran his hand across the wall like it was an old friend that still remembered his name. Either way, they didn't hesitate. They signed the lease together with hands still dirty from scraping old paint. They called it Williams and Carter Studio, not for branding, but for truth. No titles, no hierarchy. Just a name that held both of theirs equally. Half of it would be a creative studio, a space for design, music, and storytelling. The other half would be a repair workshop for the community, Broken lamps, radios, shoes, memories. Anything people brought in, they'd do their best to fix. The first week, they barely had electricity. The second, a kid named Devin brought in a torn backpack and asked if the tall guy with the deep voice could fix it. Dante did, and the kid came back 2 days later with his cousin and a broken Walkman. Word spread, quietly but persistently. By the end of the month, the studio was alive with motion. People came not just to fix things, but to be seen. Elderly men brought toasters and stories about how Roxbury used to have jazz clubs on every corner. Kids sketched their dreams in sidewalk chalk, while Maya showed them how to fold origami cranes. Someone donated a piano, keys yellowed and cracked, but Dante spent 2 nights straight making it sing again. He played it every Saturday morning, jazz melodies that made even the bricks hum. Maya stood beside him, often not saying a word, just breathing. There was a peace in that studio she hadn't known she was allowed to feel. But peace rarely goes unpunished. The photo resurfaced. This time it came attached to an anonymous email sent to the city council, CCing 3 members of her board and 2 journalists. The subject line read, "Inappropriate leadership conduct, conflict of interest, and community ethics concern." Attached was the photo of Maya and Dante laughing in the break room, along with a new one taken outside the studio, Maya leaning against the doorframe while Dante stood close, their silhouettes soft in the dusk light. The message was short. How much of this community revival is being paid for by shareholder confidence? Maya didn't flinch when she read it. She simply closed her laptop and walked into the studio where Dante was fixing a bicycle bell. "We've been spotted," she said. He looked up. "Again?" She nodded. "They're implying that because we care, we're hiding something." Dante didn't respond immediately. He finished fixing the bell, rang it once, clear and bright, and said, "Let them look. Just make sure they see everything." They kept working, kept building. But it got harder. Her board requested a meeting. They called it a courtesy checkpoint. When she arrived, it felt more like a tribunal. A long table of polished men and one woman, eyes lined with caution and caffeine. They danced around language like it was a crime scene. "We value your autonomy," one said, "but public perception is vital in times of economic uncertainty," said another. Someone mentioned Dante's name, not his title, just his name, the way you might mention a misplaced item in a curated living room. Maya stood, calm and unflinching. "This isn't a scandal," she said. "This is proximity. And if you think my nearness to someone of value outside your tax bracket is bad optics, then maybe it's not me who's out of line." She left before they could respond. That night, she returned to the studio and painted the words "You belong here" above the entrance. Kids helped fill in the letters with color. But not everyone believed it. Walter Crenshaw had been watching. A man who saw Boston not as a city but as a chessboard of profits. His development company had been eyeing the Roxbury block for months, eager to replace its cracked sidewalks and corner stores with luxury condos. The studio was now inconvenient. It had been quiet enough to ignore when it was just fixing radios. But now it had a voice. Maya had a voice. And that voice had started to echo. He sent a letter, typed, formal, legal. "The property currently known as Williams and Carter Studio is in violation of zoning expectations outlined in the 2008 Urban Renewal Guidelines." He offered a buyout. As a courtesy. It was low, insulting, really. Maya read it aloud in the studio during one of their Saturday sessions. She didn't ask for pity. She asked for paint, and they gave it. A mural began to grow on the back wall of the building faces, names, symbols, hands holding other hands, a clock melting into flowers, a boy's bike wheel turned into a sun. They called it Our Wall. It wasn't a protest, it was a portrait. Crenshaw responded by sending code inspectors. They arrived unannounced. Clipboards, flashlights, vague smirks. They found faults, of course, too many chairs, improper signage, uncertified occupancy. Maya stood by the doorway as one inspector measured a window and muttered something about fire safety. "Do you measure silence too?" she asked. He didn't respond. They received a formal citation, fines, warnings. Maya filed an appeal. She also filed for the mural to be declared a historical community landmark, not because she thought it would pass, but because it forced the conversation into public record. Dante, meanwhile, kept the doors open. People still came, still laughed, still fixed what was broken. But there was a heaviness in the air now, a question no one asked aloud. How long can something pure survive when power decides it's inconvenient? One night, as Maya was locking up, she found another envelope. No note, just a picture of the mural. Someone had spray-painted over it in black letters, "This ain't your block." Her hand shook as she held it. Not from fear, from fury. She went inside, found Dante cleaning brushes, and said, "They think they can scare us into silence." He looked at her and replied, "Then, let's get louder." They organized a Fix-It Day. They handed out flyers. They posted online. They invited everyone. Come fix what's broken. No questions, no cost. Just show up. And they did. Dozens. Then hundreds. Someone brought a grill. Someone else brought a microphone. Music played. Stories flowed. A 12-year-old read a poem. A woman got her mother's old radio working again and cried when she heard the static clear. Maya stood on the stoop and looked out over it all. She turned to Dante, who was helping a boy fix his shoes, and said quietly, "This is what they're afraid of." He didn't look up, just smiled. Good. But they both knew it was only the beginning. Because when you give people hope, it shines. And power has always hated the light. The morning Dante didn't show up, Maya knew something was wrong. He was never late, never vague, never the type to disappear without word. The studio had just opened when she got the call. A clipped official voice informed her that Dante Carter had been taken into custody the night before, suspected of making verbal threats against a city official, Dean McAllister, one of the same inspectors who'd visited the studio and written them up for violations. Her mind went still for a moment, not panicked, not yet, just eerily quiet like the seconds before an explosion. She dropped everything, plans, meetings, a grant review, and went straight to the station. They refused to let her see him. They said he was being processed. She asked on what grounds. They said they were reviewing that, which meant there were no grounds at all. Outside, she found herself surrounded by a small cluster of familiar faces. Jessa, the teenage muralist, with paint on her jeans and fire in her eyes. Theo, the shy college kid who repaired old headphones and stuttered through conversations unless he was behind a circuit board. Miss Eleanor, leaning on her cane, but standing with the dignity of someone who had seen worse days and had no intention of bending to this one. Word had already spread. Gloria Stanton arrived 20 minutes later, live streaming as she stormed through the front lobby of the station, demanding answers, pressing her press badge into anyone's face who dared look away. The internet caught on fast. The hashtags started trending by noon. Hashtag Free Dante. Hash Repair. Justice. This is Boston too. But Maya didn't care about any of that in the moment. She cared about him, about the way he looked walking into a room, about the warmth of his voice when he spoke to kids fixing their first machines, about the rhythm of him playing piano when he thought no one was listening. She paced outside the station until she couldn't anymore, then went home and opened every legal file she had. None of them helped, because what they were fighting wasn't policy, it was pattern. Fear disguised as regulation, control disguised as protection. And it was Dante who paid the price because he was visible now, too visible, too powerful, and too brown to be tolerated. He was released 2 days later. No charges, no apology, no explanation, just a paper slip and a warning to stay out of trouble. He looked tired but unbroken. Maya met him at the door and pulled him into a hug that said everything she didn't have words for. That night, they didn't talk much. They sat on the studio floor with cold takeout and warm silence. He looked at her and said, "I don't care if they listen, just don't let them make us whisper." The next morning, someone had painted over the mural again, not in black, in white this time. Thick, streaky strokes that covered everything from the reaching hands to the blooming flowers. Only one phrase was left untouched at the bottom. "This ain't your block." Maya stood there for a long time, staring at those words. Then she grabbed a bucket of gold paint and walked to the center of the wall. Slowly, deliberately, she painted a single phrase across the blank white void. "Truth can't be detained." And the community returned that afternoon with brushes, ladders, spray cans, stencils. They worked without instruction, without agenda. Just a silent agreement that something had to be said, and it had to be beautiful. They rebuilt the mural from memory and instinct. It wasn't identical, it wasn't perfect, it was better, more raw, more defiant. And at its center now, a pair of open hands surrounded by broken shackles and rising doves. But Crenshaw was escalating. 2 days later, a team of lawyers arrived with papers. Formal, heavy, meant to intimidate. They were suing the studio for breach of lease, citing outdated clauses in zoning agreements from over a decade ago. Maya flipped through the documents with steady hands, each page smelling like bureaucracy dipped in arrogance. They accused her of unauthorized renovation, unregulated public gatherings, community endangerment. It was absurd, but also dangerous, because absurdity, when weaponized by power, becomes precedent. She called Raymond Archer. He arrived the next morning in a brown corduroy suit with elbow patches and the kind of eyes that had seen too much to flinch easily. He was retired, technically, but still sharp, still dangerous. He looked through the papers, nodded, and said, "They think this'll scare you into settling, into disappearing. Don't." She didn't. They filed a counterclaim, challenged the injunction, demanded a public hearing. The city couldn't ignore them now. Too many eyes, too many hashtags, too many people who had once believed their silence would protect them, now realizing only volume could. The hearing was scheduled 2 weeks later in a sterile conference room with beige walls and bad lighting. The chairs squeaked. The microphones were too loud. The tension was biblical. Crenshaw's lawyers went first. They wore charcoal suits and smiles like pressed linen. They spoke of property values and community codes, of safety and standards. They never mentioned race, never mentioned gentrification, but they didn't have to. The implication hung in every syllable. This block would be better without them. Then Maya stood. She didn't have slides, she didn't have data. She had stories. She spoke of the people who walked through their door, of a grandfather who hadn't heard music since his record player broke in 1986, now dancing again in the back room to Marvin Gaye, of a mother who brought her son to fix his shoes because she couldn't afford new ones and walked out with dignity intact, of a mural that had been painted over and reborn because some things don't die easy. She didn't speak like a CEO. She spoke like a builder, like someone who had seen something bloom in dry ground and refused to let it be salted. Then the community spoke. Miss Eleanor read a letter. Jessa showed sketches of the mural's transformation. Theo spoke, voice shaking but firm. Even Marcus, who never talked much, stepped forward and said, "I used to think no one saw me. Now I know they just weren't looking hard enough." The panel deliberated, promised a decision within 30 days, but Maya knew better than to wait, because that night the mural burned. Someone used accelerant, traced the flames carefully across the wall so that the edges curled and blackened like ancient parchment. By the time firefighters arrived, the back section of the studio was gone. The mural, the piano, the benches, ashes. Maya arrived before sunrise. She stood where the studio wall used to be, the air still thick with smoke. Dante stood beside her, silent, his face unreadable. Around them, the first light of morning revealed the damage in full. A canvas destroyed, a memory charred. But then the people came, one by one, wordless at first, then in quiet motion. Someone brought paint, someone else brought wood. Jessa arrived with her backpack full of sketches. Miss Eleanor brought tea. A child came with daisies and placed them gently on the ash. They didn't wait for permission. They didn't hold a meeting. They just began. Rebuilding, repainting, refusing to shrink. And Maya? She pulled out a roll of blueprints, not of what they'd lost, of what they were going to build next. The ashes were still warm when the first child knelt down and placed a single daisy in the dirt where the mural had once breathed color into the alley. No one told her to do it. No one orchestrated the moment. It simply happened, and from there, the silence cracked open like a seed. By mid-afternoon, that scorched wall had transformed into something else, a vigil, a defiance, a soft scream. Flowers, candles, notes in 10 different languages, paintings on scraps of cardboard, a cracked violin leaning against a salvaged cinder block. Someone spray-painted over the blackened bricks in trembling silver. "We rise in pieces." Maya read it aloud, the words catching in her throat like sunlight trapped between two clouds. She didn't cry. She hadn't cried yet, but something inside her finally stopped shaking. They had lost the mural, the piano, the benches, the scaffolding, the quiet hum of sanctuary. But what had survived was louder. The people, the purpose, the refusal. Maya didn't take a single day off. Instead, she sent emails, rewrote permits, filed emergency appeals. She contacted the local historical society and submitted a 28-page proposal to designate the site as a community anchor. Dante worked beside her through every dusk and every dawn. His hands blistered, his voice raw from explaining to volunteers how to brace new beams or safely strip burned flooring. He never complained, not once. And every night, when the floodlights clicked on and illuminated the wreckage, he'd whisper under his breath like a hymn, "They can't unbuild this." Raymond filed an emergency injunction against the demolition team that Crenshaw had hired under pretext of public hazard removal, and the judge, pressed by media attention and public outrage, granted a 2-week pause. It wasn't justice, but it was time. That was all Maya needed. They used the delay like oxygen. People came with crowbars, paintbrushes, toolkits, amplifiers. Jessa returned with a roll of new sketches and a fire in her voice Maya hadn't heard before. Theo arrived carrying a box of salvaged wires and said, "We can rebuild the soundboard. I know how." Elderly women cooked meals for volunteers. Teens from across the city showed up with spray cans, claiming wall space and painting images of hope stitched with fury. By the third day, a local news station ran a segment called Ashes and Echoes, the studio that wouldn't die. Maya didn't watch it. She was on a ladder, repainting the ceiling with primer. But later that night, Gloria Stanton messaged her, "You've lit something no one can smother. Be ready." And they were. The city council, under pressure, announced a formal community hearing to determine the future of the space. Crenshaw's team tried to shift tactics, rebranding their development as inclusive housing, proposing a small plaque in the lobby to honor the cultural value of what once stood. Maya laughed when she read the proposal, not out of joy, out of clarity, because it confirmed what she knew from the beginning. They didn't want to erase her because she was loud. They wanted to erase her because she was visible, because she dared to build something in plain sight that didn't ask for permission. The hearing drew a crowd bigger than anyone expected. Maya stood at the front, hands clasped, voice steady. She didn't use data. She used truth. She talked about the kid who fixed his broken glasses and stayed to tutor a younger boy. She talked about the grandmother who brought a sewing machine and stayed to mend her grief. She talked about Dante, not just the man, but the presence, the builder, the anchor. She ended with the sentence that someone would later turn into a poster. "We're not building a business, we're building proof." Then Dante spoke. He didn't read from notes. He didn't perform. He just told the truth like it had teeth. He spoke of his mother, of how she used to walk past that building and say it looked like a heart someone forgot to finish drawing. He said the studio gave him a reason to wake up, not for a paycheck, but for purpose. He said, "They can rebuild buildings. They can't rebuild trust once it's lost. We earned this, every inch." The council didn't respond that day, but the people did. They marched back to the site with renewed urgency. Someone brought lights and installed them along the roof. Someone else found wood to replace the scorched flooring. That night, under floodlights and stars, they sang. No formal concert, just voices, just warmth. 3 days later, the city released its decision. The studio would remain. Not just allowed, but protected, recognized as a community anchor. Eligible for grants, shielded from development for 10 years. The mural wall was designated as historically expressive art, and Crenshaw's appeal was denied. No more threats, no more letters, just a silence he couldn't spin into fear. They rebuilt faster than anyone thought possible. The new studio had solar panels, a sliding wall that became a stage, a room with nothing but pillows and soft lighting where people could breathe. The kids named it the Echo Room. Maya cried the day she saw it, not loudly, just a quiet release, like finally letting the air back in. On the 1-year anniversary of the fire, they held a celebration. Not a reopening, a rebirth. People brought food, danced, read poetry. Theo's repaired soundboard played local voices through repurposed speakers. Jess's new mural spanned the entire back wall, no longer hands reaching out, but hands holding each other. At the center, a tree growing from ash, its roots wrapped around the names of everyone who had built this place. That night, as the crowd drifted home, Maya and Dante stood in front of the mural, the lights casting long shadows at their feet. He reached for her hand. She didn't hesitate. They stood like that for a long time, watching as the final candles flickered. Then he whispered, "They tried to make us small." She looked up and replied, "But we remembered we were whole." They didn't kiss. Not then. It wasn't that kind of ending. It was better. They walked back inside, together, and the city exhaled around them, a little braver, a little louder, a little more like home.